In the world of illicit drug trade, few regions have played as pivotal a role in global trafficking as Latin America. For decades, countries in this region have been the primary producers of illicit drugs like cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamines. The demand for these substances, particularly in North America and Europe, has created powerful and ruthless drug cartels that control the flow of narcotics across borders. But in recent years, Africa has emerged as a key player in this dark trade. Latin American cartels have increasingly turned to the African continent to smuggle drugs, taking advantage of its vast geography, weak law enforcement, and strategic location. This documentary explores how Latin American cartels use Africa as a transit point for moving drugs to international markets, the socio-political dynamics that enable this trade, and the efforts by African nations and global organizations to combat the growing influence of drug trafficking in Africa. Africa's importance in global drug trafficking lies in its geography. The continent is strategically situated between the major drug markets of Europe and the Americas. This makes Africa an ideal transit hub for cartels trying to smuggle drugs to Europe and the Middle East. Historically, Latin American cartels have focused on routes through the Caribbean and the United States for their drug shipments. However, increased law enforcement efforts in these regions, particularly along the U.S.-Mexico border, have led cartels to look for alternative routes. Africa, with its vast coastlines and relatively weak border controls, provides the perfect route for these cartels. Cocaine, in particular, is the most commonly trafficked drug through Africa. According to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, West Africa has become a central transit point for South American cocaine being moved to Europe. The drug is often shipped from South America to West African countries like Guinea-Bissau, Senegal, and Côte d'Ivoire, where it is offloaded to Europe, either by sea or air. The sheer volume of cocaine passing through these regions has made them important hubs in the global narcotics trade. The main reason Africa has become a prime target for Latin American drug cartels is its vulnerability. Many African countries suffer from weak law enforcement, political instability, and corruption, which makes it easier for traffickers to operate with relative impunity. For instance, Guinea-Bissau, one of the smallest countries in West Africa, has become infamous for being a drug haven. The country's political instability, coupled with its proximity to both the Americas and Europe, has made it a key location for cocaine transshipment. Similar conditions can be found in other African nations, where drug traffickers exploit these vulnerabilities to facilitate their operations. Africa's extensive coastlines and numerous airports provide cartels with numerous entry and exit points. Ports in West and East Africa, such as those in Lagos, Nigeria, and Mombasa, Kenya, have been used by traffickers to transport illicit drugs. These ports are often overwhelmed with legitimate trade, making it difficult for authorities to track suspicious shipments. Containers of goods are often used as cover to transport drugs, with the illicit substances hidden among legitimate cargo. In addition, many of these ports have experienced corruption at various levels of their operations, making it easy for traffickers to bribe their way through. Airports also play a significant role in the African drug trade. Traffickers use both commercial and private planes to transport drugs across the continent and beyond. Several international flights from Latin American countries land in African airports where drugs are offloaded before being flown on to Europe or the Middle East. African airports, particularly those in West Africa, have become increasingly targeted by traffickers due to their limited security and lax customs enforcement. The drug trade often operates through a complex web of criminal networks that connect various African nations to Latin American cartels. These networks involve not just local drug traffickers, but also politicians, businessmen, and law enforcement officers who facilitate the movement of drugs through the continent. Cartels often use local criminals or corrupt officials to set up clandestine operations, making it difficult for authorities to dismantle these operations. The drug trade in Africa has profound consequences on the political, social, and economic landscape of the continent. One of the most significant impacts is the rise in violence and organized crime. As Latin American cartels and local criminals battle for control over drug routes, violent confrontations often spill over into communities. The influx of cash generated by the drug trade also fuels corruption, as politicians and law enforcement officers are bribed to turn a blind eye to the criminal activity.
Cooking fentanyl is now the most lucrative career for many young Sinaloan men. They hide their exact formula from me in case I try to steal it.
Deberían de estar destinando fondos.
Mexico's president has denied multiple times that fentanyl is produced in his country. He blames American culture for the crisis.
Hay mucha desintegración de las familias, hay mucho individualismo.
Additionally, the involvement of African countries in the drug trade has led to a rise in drug consumption within the continent. While Africa has traditionally had low levels of drug abuse compared to other parts of the world, this is changing. As drugs pass through African ports and airports, they often find their way into local markets. Countries such as Nigeria and South Africa are seeing increased rates of drug abuse, particularly among the youth. Cocaine, heroin, and synthetic drugs like methamphetamine are becoming more prevalent in African cities, leading to a range of public health challenges. The drug trade also undermines economic development. Many African nations are already grappling with poverty, unemployment, and underdevelopment. The diversion of resources to combat drug trafficking, coupled with the destabilizing effects of organized crime, makes it harder for governments to focus on essential development projects. Moreover, as the drug trade becomes more entrenched in local economies, it creates a culture of impunity and lawlessness that erodes public trust in government institutions. Despite the challenges, African governments and international organizations are increasingly working together to combat the drug trade. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime has been at the forefront of supporting African countries in their efforts to tackle the problem. The UNOC provides technical assistance, capacity-building programs, and funding for anti-drug operations. These programs help improve border control, enhance law enforcement capacity, and increase cooperation between African countries and international law enforcement agencies. At the national level, some African countries have taken bold steps to confront the drug trade. For example, Nigeria has implemented a series of anti-drug policies, including the creation of specialized drug law enforcement agencies and the expansion of anti-narcotics education programs. However, many countries still face significant challenges due to corruption, lack of resources, and political instability.
And South Africa is increasingly being exploited by international criminals to push drugs to other parts of the world. Only a few days ago, police intercepted a 70 million rand cocaine shipment at the Durban harbour. And on Friday, an 80 million rand stash was found at King Shaka International Airport. ENCA reporter Dason Tathia looks at the extent of the growing problem.
These tins look like stock from your local hardware store. But what's inside is not as legally available. Over 70 million rand in cocaine, packed and disguised within a shipment of paint from Brazil.
Our members that are working here in Durban Harbour, together with the intelligence in KwaZulu-Natal, are quite effective in that they were able to detect this from when it started coming until it arrived here.
Despite these efforts, the scale of the problem remains daunting. Latin American cartels continue to find ways to exploit Africa's weaknesses, and the drug trade shows no signs of abating. As long as the demand for illicit drugs remains high in Europe, the United States, and the Middle East, Africa will likely continue to play a central role in the global drug trade. This trade has led to a rise in violence, corruption, and drug abuse across the continent, further destabilizing an already fragile region. While African governments and international organizations are making strides to combat the problem, the sheer scale and complexity of the trade make it an ongoing challenge. Ultimately, addressing the role of Africa in the global drug trade requires a multifaceted approach that includes better law enforcement, international cooperation, and efforts to reduce demand for drugs. Until these measures are fully implemented, Africa will remain a key battleground in the fight against the global drug trade.